All right, good morning. Hey, if you got a Bible, open up to Numbers chapter 14 and go to verse 1. Numbers chapter 14, go to verse 1. And we're continuing our series this morning, Life's Too Short. Life's Too Short. And man, we're about to dive in. We're going to get it going here in just a second. Man, just look at somebody beside you and say, get ready. Look at the other person and say, come on. You got to stay with me today, all right? You got to stay with me. I'm fired up. And here's the deal. Life's too short to be negative. Let me give you a play-by-play real quickly of sometimes what goes through my head before a Sunday morning, either on Saturday or right before walking on stage. Stand up, step up, proclaim the word of God. Stand down, stay quiet. Nobody wants to hear it. Somebody needs to hear it. Does it really matter? It really matters because it's eternal. You see, in my mind come different thoughts, positive and negative. And I'm sure in your life you have moments where there's positive thoughts and there's negative thoughts. And oftentimes we can identify those thoughts as one coming from God and one coming from the enemy. But the truth is we all have different thoughts that go through our mind. And the danger in that is, what do we do with those thoughts? Because if we let certain thoughts stay, if we let certain thoughts dwell, if we let certain thoughts begin to stir in our mind, what will happen is we'll begin to act on those thoughts. Our behavior will be determined by those thoughts, and our direction will be determined by those thoughts. Our mind is a powerful thing. And so how do we navigate through life? Navigating the negative things that come in our mind and come into our thought life. I want to show you some things from Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 4 today. And if you're new to church, let me catch you up. And if you've been in church for a while, let me give you a recap leading up to where we'll pick up off of. The children of Israel were held in captivity in Egypt. They were slaves. And they were treated harshly. They were treated badly. Even the firstborn was killed of the males. And they began to cry out to God to deliver them and to save them from captivity. So God comes to a guy named Moses, and he says, Moses, I want you to deliver my people from Egypt. And Moses goes back to Egypt, and Moses stands before Pharaoh, and God begins to work wonders and miracles, finally to the point of Pharaoh releasing the people to leave with Moses. There's even a point as they're leaving where the Red Sea is in front of them and the Egyptian army is behind them. God protects them. God parts the Red Sea and leads them to safety. Then God would be with the children of Israel. He'd provide manna for them. He'd provide food and water for them. He'd lead them by a fire and by a pillar. He would begin to be there for them and walk with them and deliver them and be with them. And God was leading them where? Where was he leading them? To the promised land. And they get to this moment where God has been telling them about this land that he has promised them. This means God had promised them this land. That means he was going to give them this land. That means this land was theirs. And they get to the point where they're about to enter into this land, and they send 12 spies into the land. 2 spies come back and say, we can take this land. God's given it to us. 10 spies come back, and they say, there's no way we can take this land. They say the people are too big, the people are too great. There's no way we can take this land. And from that report, negativity broke out through the camp of the children of Israel, and that's where we pick up in verse 1 today. Let's read. Then the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron, and the whole community told them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. All of a sudden, in a moment, because of the report from these 10 guys, they begin to weep, they begin to cry out, they begin to say, let's go back to Egypt. Wouldn't we be better off if we stayed in Egypt? They're ready to throw Moses out, they're ready to throw Aaron out, and all of a sudden, this negative mindset sweeps through the camp, and they're all ready to give up, they're all ready to give in, because they feel like they came all this way for nothing. I want to show you a few things from this passage that negativity does to us. Number one, negativity robs you of joy. It robs you of joy. Look at 14:1 again. Then the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. Immediately they break into these loud cries, and they're weeping. But don't miss this morning. They're having loud cries, and they're weeping for no reason. God was going to give them that land if they would have just stepped into it. God was going to deliver them into that land if they just stepped into it. God had promised them that land. It was already theirs. All they had to do was step into it. But because of this negative report in their minds, they think it's no longer possible, and they began to weep, and they began to wail, and all of a sudden their joy is being taken from them. All of a sudden, in an instant, they have no more faith, they have no more hope, and their joy is gone. Let's talk about joy for a second. I like the way the Bible Project describes it. It's a lasting emotion that comes from the choice to trust that God will fulfill His promises. A lasting emotion, not one that comes and one that goes, that comes from the choice to trust that God will fulfill His promises. What does that mean? Even though I'm in a bad situation, even though I don't know what's on the other side, even though my circumstance is bad in this moment, I've still got a joy that is deep down within me, deep down in my well, a joy that can't be taken from me because I believe God will fulfill His promise one way or another. We may not have the actual promised land, a physical land to enter into, but if we're believers in Jesus, all of us have a promised land that awaits us one day that is in heaven, where there'll be no more weeping, there'll be no more pain, there'll be no more sorrow forever. So even if this world is bad, even though this world is ugly, even though we go through trials and tribulations, you know what? We have a joy that wells up inside of us to say, even though I'm in the darkest of nights, even though I'm in this valley, even though I'm in this trial, I know God will fulfill His promise. And somehow, some way, He'll heal me. Somehow, some way, He'll restore me. Somehow, some way, He'll deliver me. Somehow, some way, even if it's not on this side of eternity, His promise will be fulfilled. So I still have a joy that you can't take from me. Let's fast forward to the New Testament. Jesus talked about the Holy Spirit. He said, I'm going to leave you the Holy Spirit. And those of us who are believers in Jesus, we have the Holy Spirit that dwells within us. And in Galatians, it talks about the flesh and it talks about the Spirit. And in Galatians 5:22, it says this, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy that wells up within us. You know, sometimes it's about perspective for us, isn't it? And where we find joy. You know, James talks about, even though I endure these various trials, I consider it pure joy. Now, I don't think that meant James was jumping up and down doing jumping jacks and saying, I love Jesus. Yes, I do. I love Jesus. How about you? Even though it's the worst day of my life. But I think he was saying, hey, I still have a joy because I know through this testing, through this trial, God is producing something in me. And He's working something out on the other side. And sometimes it's about our perspective. You know, I've become friends with a guy named Mark Broadhead who's in here somewhere. I saw him come in. I'm going to pick on him here for a moment. Mark called me one morning. He texted me first, said, hey, can you give me a call when you get a chance? I said, absolutely. I call him back. Mark picks up the phone, and he starts the sentence like this. He said, Sam, let me tell you how redneck I am. Now, whenever someone starts a conversation that way, I'm always curious, where is this about to go? And Mark said, I was driving down the interstate in my truck. He said, I'm driving down the interstate in my truck, and keep in mind it's deer season during this time. And as he's driving down the interstate in his truck, all of a sudden, boom, hits a deer. Now, most of us would automatically go, dadgummit, we hit a deer, my car's going to have to be fixed, I'm going to be late to work, This is an awful, awful day. But Mark pulled over to the side, and he looked out his window, and he noticed the deer was still limping. And it crossed his mind that his meat freezer was empty of deer meat. Now, this is a true story. God is my witness. And Mark said, I didn't want to shoot him because I was on the interstate and there's cars whizzing back and forth. I said, well, that's a great decision, Mark. Good job. Smart decision. He said, but then adrenaline took over. This is a true story. And he said, I sprinted and I tackled that deer. Then he said, I got behind the deer, had to position myself where the antlers wouldn't get me, and I choked the deer out on the side of the interstate. Could you imagine driving down the interstate and seeing this guy choking a deer out? I said, Mark, that might be the most redneck thing I've ever heard. And thank God you're in our church. Most people would have said, man, we hit something. This is awful. This is terrible. Man, my car's ruined. I'm late to work. Mark said, I hit something, but now I got a freezer full of meat. Now, I'm not saying go out and tackle deers on the side of the interstate and choke them out, all right? But here's what I am saying. Sometimes there's something on the other side of what we're being hit with. Sometimes there's something on the other side of what we're being smacked in the face with. Sometimes there's something on the other side of what we're being dented up with. And I think God's saying, there's something on the other side. You just hold on to me, cling on to me, and I'm producing something on the other side of that hit. Number 2 this morning, think of this. Negativity is contagious. It's contagious. Look at what it says in verse 2. All, not some, not a few, all the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron. And the whole community told them, if we had only died in the land of Egypt, or if we had only died in this wilderness. It's amazing to me how all of a sudden this negativity spreads through the whole camp like wildfire. That now all of a sudden all these people are negative. All these people have lost hope. All these people say, man, it's it. Let's go back to Egypt. Let's get rid of Moses and Aaron. And all of a sudden negativity has spread like wildfire through this camp. And isn't it so true that sometimes negativity can spread just like a disease? From one person to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. Some of you this morning are realizing that you need to get some new friends in your life. Because your circle is always negative. And that's why you're always negative. But man, there's a side of us, if we're honest this morning, that loves negative news. That's why if you actually research and actually study, they say that negative news sells a lot better than positive news, and that's why all the headlines are negative. That's why all the news is negative, because people are more interested in negative news than positive news. They know if it's negative, someone might actually click on it. They know if it's negative, someone might not change the channel. They know if it's negative, someone else might pass it along. And sometimes maybe we're guilty of that. Sometimes we have negative news, and maybe it makes us feel good to be the one to tell someone else because we know the information and they don't know it, and we want to spread it on because we feel important in that moment. You ever remember in school, and you guys are in school, how amazing it was that if a fight was going to happen, that all of a sudden, every single person in the school knew when, where, and who was fighting. It's like spread like wildfire. Someone should do a study on how does that even happen. But something good happens, and that goes nowhere. It doesn't spread at all. My question for you this morning, what's so interesting to me about this, is that nobody stopped it. Like someone in the crowd could have easily been like, whoa, time out. Before we're ready to go back to Egypt, maybe we should talk to God. Hey, time out. I heard what these 10 have to say, but before we're ready to go back to Egypt, maybe we should bring Moses in and Aaron in and hear what they have to say. But yet it just went from one person to the next person to the next person to the next person. And my question for you would be this. Would you be someone who continues to spread it, or would you be someone that says, whoa, God's been faithful time and time again. he'll be faithful this time too. Whoa. Moses is the leader that God has put in position here. So unless you want to mess with God, let's not talk about Moses that way. Whoa. Let's breathe for a minute. Or would we spread it? Because here's where it's important. Number 3, negativity distorts reality. Distorts reality. Look at what it says, Numbers 14:3. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? He's not. God was going to give them this land. And now they're saying, why is God bringing us in this land to die? They weren't going to die. They were going to inherit what God had actually promised them. Look at what it says. Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Think of how messed up that is. In Egypt, they had to put Moses in a basket because they're killing the firstborn. And now in this moment, they're saying, wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? They weren't going to die, but they're saying, we're going to die. And think about this. Their whole reality has been messed up and thrown off track. And negativity will change our whole perception of what reality actually is. The reality in this moment is that whatever was in that land is not more powerful than their gods. The reality is that God can deliver them in that moment just like he did from the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. The reality is that God is still with them and for them, and he has not abandoned them, and he'll be with them if they just walk into that land. The reality is that God is about to give them the land they've been promised. But they've let a negative mindset come in and distort the truth. And they've begun to believe something that's not even real at all. Isn't that interesting how it happens in our life? That all of a sudden something that was so bad in our life we want to go back to when we get negative. There's some circumstance, some situation, we get so negative and we think, man, what's the point? What does it matter? And really it's not true at all. I don't know how you guys are, but when I get real negative, I go downhill fast. Like I'm either like on Mount Everest or I'm like at the bottom of the ocean. Like it's one or the other. And when it gets bad, everything's bad. Life's bad, marriage is bad, kids are bad, don't like church, don't like anything. It just avalanches. And none of that's actually true. You just get in that moment where you just start venting, you just start having a pity party and getting negative and let that negativity control your life. Anybody just love school in the room? Who loves school? Who loves to learn? I love it. Y'all did this in the first service too. Everybody that wanted to say they love school, they went like this. Who actually loves school? Raise it up high. Raise it like you just don't care. I see you. Good people. We need you people. Educators, learners. I hate school. Now you guys need to keep going to school. You need to be good students. You need to study. You need to learn. It's important. But I've never been a big school guy. I consider myself more of a practitioner than someone that loves to study and be a student. You know, we're a Baptist church. If you were to pull up my seminary degree and you see Baptist history next to it, it will say D. It's because I missed a midterm. But you know what D stands for? Degree, baby, diploma. Come on, come on. Ain't nobody looking at that transcript. All they see is that degree hanging in my office. But I have a professor at school. I'm working on my doctorate right now. Lord help us. Pray for me. And I'm trying to pay Katie to write my papers for me. Just kidding. But there's this professor at school, and he's known as like the stickler for like he's going to come after you with every mistake, everything you do wrong. So I typed up my paper like I normally do, and I sent it to him. About a month later, I go to check my grade on the paper. And when I go to check my paper, the grade that I got, he had sent my whole paper back to me. So instead of giving me a grade, he just sent it back. He said, do it again. So I sent it to him a second time. I go to check the grade the second time. He sent me the paper again. Go to check the grade a third time. He sent me the paper back again. So I just sent the paper in a fourth time. We're all going to pray right now that he doesn't send it back again, all right? But one of the big mistakes that I was making, that he kept telling me, was some of my sources weren't academically, verified or correct and things like that. And so some of my sources weren't correct and didn't count because they weren't a certain academic accreditation that needed to be used for that paper. And so it didn't matter what information was in the paper because my source was wrong. My source was incorrect. I just wonder how many times in our life we might need to look down and go, man, is the source actually worth giving credit to? Whatever information's coming in my life, whatever information's coming in, is the source actually verified? Or is the source really just some lie from the enemy that I don't even need to entertain, I don't even need to think about, I don't even need to let cross my mind? I just need to send that paper on back of those words that are full of lies that really doesn't have a source that actually matters. Because so often we might be letting things in our life, and I'll talk about it here in just a moment, from a source that actually has no credibility. Because number 4, here's why it matters. Negativity affects decision making. It affects our decision making. Verse 4, look at what it says. So they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. They're ready. They said, Moses, we're finding another leader. And we're going back to Egypt. All because this negative mindset creeped in, and now they've made this decision, let's appoint a different leader, and let's go back to Egypt. So don't miss this morning, but what we begin to let in our mind, what we begin to let stew, what we begin to let stir, will then oftentimes will begin determining our behavior and our direction. Because they let this negative mindset begin to go on in their mind and continue in their mind, now they've decided a direction that says, we're done with Moses, we're going back to Egypt, and we're done with what God has for us. See, what we allow in our mind oftentimes will dictate our behavior. What we allow to stay in our mind will begin to dictate the direction that we go. You know, negativity always says can't. God says, through me, you can. Negativity always says, your best days are gone. And God says, I'm just getting started with you. Negativity says, this whole thing doesn't matter. And God says, I have given you breath, I've given you life, I've got a calling on your life and a purpose for your life. Negativity says, this whole thing is meaningless and my life is meaningless and my life doesn't matter at all. Negativity will lead you to take something and to begin to cut yourself because you don't find yourself worthy. And God is saying, you are a son or a daughter of mine, and I'm the king. So if anybody wonders if you've got worth, you're my son or my daughter, and you've got plenty of worth. Negativity will lead you down a road that will lead you to a dark place where finally you're putting your own self in some kind of prison cell. And Jesus is saying, I've got the keys. And you don't have to live in that black tunnel, in that black hole that you're going down. You can walk out of it and live the life that I've called you to live. Here's why I asked this morning too. If it affects the decisions we make, then what are we allowing to enter our mind? Let me say it this way. Do you have a filter for what's coming in and out of your mind? Listen, I love Netflix. I could go home today and I could binge watch Netflix all day long. I love it. But I'll be the first to say this morning that there are several things on Netflix that I've clicked on. And boy, I've had to click out of real fast. And I'll be dead straight honest with you this morning. There's times where I didn't click out or I didn't click out fast enough. Listen, that phone, we all have a device. There's good things that can happen with that phone. But what are you letting in your life as you scroll on social media and all these different platforms? What are you allowing to come in your mind? There's nothing wrong with Facebook. But how much time are you spending on Facebook and letting that information creep into your mind? There's nothing wrong with the news. But how much time are you spending with the news instead of the Word of God? And whatever you're spending all that time with and allowing in your mind will then determine your behavior and how you act and how you walk. Man, some of us, we get so consumed with swiping a certain way left or right on dating apps and all these different things, and we're letting all this information come in our mind, and we don't realize it's killing us because it's determining our behavior. Someone said, man, pornography is not a big deal. There's nothing that harmful about it. It's all good, Sam. But you know what it's doing? It's making you look at someone else like an object instead of as a son or a daughter of God. And it's killing your brain. It's killing your mind. It's perverting your mind. And it's messing you up. And all I'm asking this morning, I'm not trying to beat anybody up. I'm just going, do you have a gauge? What am I allowing to enter into my mind? Because once it goes in my mind, guess who can use it? Satan. The enemy. Yourself. And it's better to stop it before it ever gets in than to try to get it out once it gets in. Thankfully, by the grace of God, we can get it out. And here's why that matters. Number 5, negativity has consequences. Has consequences. Because the children of Israel allowed this negative mindset to creep in, because they said we want to get rid of Moses and we want to go back to Egypt, God would make them wander in the desert for 40 years. And the land was right there. It was right there. All they had to do was step into it. And now they've got to walk around the wilderness for 40 years because they let negativity creep in. I want to give you some things real quick. Guard your mind. It matters because there's consequences. So guard your mind. Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, and if there is anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. 2 Corinthians 10:5. And every proud thing that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. Ephesians 6:17. Take the helmet of salvation. See, because we're going to have negative thoughts, because a life is going to throw different things out of us, we've got to choose to fight. And you've got to fight those negative thoughts. You've got to take them captive. You've got to guard your mind. And then, as we talked about, you've got to get in the Word and you've got to pray, spend time with the Lord. You've got to redirect your thoughts and you've got to attack those negative thoughts. Now, I want to be very clear this morning. If someone is in the room and they're struggling with depression or PTSD or things of that nature, man, we want to walk with you. We want to pray with you. But we also would encourage you to go to some Christian counseling that we have on our website and to spend the time with a Christian counselor that knows that. And we want to pray with you and walk with you through that as well. For others of us, when we have these negative thoughts, how do we go about them? You know, last week, as the band comes back out and begins to play in the background, last week we talked about our past. Life's too short to live in the past. And last week many of you came up and you laid an index card down at the altar. And it was, I need God to deliver me from something in my past. Here's the thing, God can deliver you just like that. But does it always happen that way? No. Sometimes it does, but then sometimes it's a process. And you've still got to fight, and you've still got to say, God, I'm fighting this battle. I'm walking with you. I'm doing the things that you've told me to do, and I'm fighting this battle. What did God say? Take every thought captive. What did God say? Guard your minds. What did God say? Dwell on these things, which are all praiseworthy and excellent. And so for some of us, it looks like this. Someone last week came up and they laid down a card. And I think 2 weeks go hand in hand. And it said, pride and ego is what I'm laying down. Laziness and gossip. And what it looks like for that person is saying, man, every time that prideful thought creeps in, because it starts in the mind first and then it acts out. Every time that prideful thought comes in, I'm saying, no. God has called me to be humble. Christ himself had humility by coming to earth and dying on a cross. So I'm going to have the humility of Jesus. I'm going to get down and wash people's feet. I'm going to serve others, and it's not going to be about me. It's going to be about others. Someone wrote down sexual immorality and teenage pregnancy. And for that person, they still may have thoughts that they've messed up too much, that their mistakes are too far in the past for them to keep going forward. And God's telling them this morning, and when that thought comes in, you just look back at that thought and you say, no, no, no. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I'm a new creation in Jesus. And this sexual immorality that comes in my head, I'm going to fight it. So when a lustful thought comes in my head, I'm saying, whoa. Job 31:1 says, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully upon a young woman. And you're fighting that thought when it comes in. Someone else wrote, my ex-wife in marriage. And for some of you, you might have laid down something about your marriage that you're going through right now. And the thought going through your head is, my marriage is never going to work out. My marriage is never going to be restored. Why should I even try? And you know what you need to do? You need to fight back and you need to say, through the power of Jesus, God can restore our marriage. Through the power of Jesus, God can redeem our marriage. Through the power of Jesus, he can bring what everybody thinks is impossible and he can throw it to the wayside. And you're fighting that battle. Someone wrote down grief, alcohol, resentment, and daddy issues. And for that person, they may feel like this. Man, I had an earthly father, but I was never good enough for my earthly father. When that thought comes in, they've got to say, you know what? I do have a heavenly Father, and he's already told me I'm good enough. And he's told me I'm his son or daughter. If it's grief and you're feeling like, man, Sam, you don't understand. I don't feel like this pain is ever going to go away. I don't feel like God can heal the grief that I'm walking in. The thought comes in, I don't know how long it's going to last, God, but I'm trusting that you'll fulfill your promise. I'm trusting that you will heal me. I'm trusting that you will bring me through this. For alcohol, when that thought comes in of just go to the bottle will truly satisfy you. You say, well, I've already tasted the living water that can truly satisfy. So I'm not going back to that bottle. I'm going back to the well of Jesus, and I'm drinking there. See, I don't know what it is, but I think sometimes we've got to realize it's a battle, it's a fight, and you've got to choose to fight it. Would you bow your head and close your eyes all over this room? I did this with the first service, and I just feel led to do it again in here. I don't know how you walked in. I don't know what you're going through. But if you're in this room today, you say, Sam, nobody looking around, nobody moving. You say, Sam, I'm dealing with negative thoughts in my life. And I need some help. I need to fight it. I need some prayer. Sam, I'm dealing with negativity in my mind. But with nobody looking around, nobody moving, would you just raise your hand? Just raise it up. Raise it up high. I see you. Hands all over. Raise it up high. I see you. I see you. I see you. Yeah, I see you. Raise it up high. I'm going to ask you to take another step. If you got your hand up, would you just look up at me? Yeah. Keep it up. Keep looking at me. Yeah. 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 I'm going to ask you to take a bold step. And I just want to spend a little time praying for you in those thoughts. If you're looking at me, had your hand up, would you just come meet me right here? Nobody else is looking. Nobody else is moving. Just come on down right now. Sam, that's me. I got some negative thoughts. I just want to pray for you. I want to get some people to pray with you. Yeah, come on down. We'll wait. Wait. Yeah. Come on down. Yeah. So I'm going to ask if I can get some prayer partners to come down front, just all over. Here's what I'm going to ask you guys to do, just simply to pair up with a prayer partner. And just let them know what's going on in your mind. Let them know what's going through your mind. And just let them pray over you. And I'll pray over here in a little bit, but just let them pray over you. And so they're all behind you. If you want to just begin to pair up behind Colton, come over here. Demarie, some others, help out. Got to get some more prayer partners down front. They're right behind you. You can just grab someone behind you. Begin to pray with them. Still looking for some right here.